with the level of automation we've seen in day 0 and day 1, there's an expectation that we can do a lot with a small number of resources, a small number of engineers. But really, it's around giving the operations team the proper tools they need to simply click a button and the fabric upgrades itself, for example, or even getting to the point where you don't even need to click that button and the fabric stays upgraded perpetually. So this is the area I think it's ripe for innovation. It's an area we, of course, are focusing on quite heavily within Nokia in our data center portfolio. This is kind of the last frontier of automation, if you will, inside the data center, and I guess more broadly in the network in general. So I think we'll start to see that trend where, you can imagine you have a network of, say, 10,000 switches. This is not even a fraction of the scale that some of these hyperscalers operate at. There's no way you can have someone sitting in a NOC that is just looking at a stream of alarms that come in and trying to react to them. So we're trying to automate more and more and move the focus of that NOC engineer to the highly critical issues that can't be solved through automation. So I think this whole operations area has a number of aspects to it. It's making that NOC engineer's life easier. It's making the project teams that are doing maintenance on the fabric easier. It's to make the configuration engineer that's having to deploy services, after the initial services have been deployed easier, driving more and more of those via the applications themselves. I think this is a general trend we're going to see when we talk about day 2+ and automation. We're going to see a lot of these tasks that we never thought wouldn't be done by a human start to not be done by a human, basically. I think there'll be a big focus on extensibility of the operating system, opening up the foundation of it, if you will, to enable not just the vendor to iterate on it, but customers, engineers that like to just contribute to projects. I think we'll start to see more and more things trend towards open source. And I know there's often a heated debate around, open and open source and the two not being necessarily the same. I think we'll see more and more vendors building frameworks and not features. And certainly they'll build features that consume those frameworks, but I think we're starting to get to the point where, the general market has a very healthy appetite for being able to iterate on the network operating systems, build small quality of life functions or small workflow automations that they want to be able to deploy into the network. It's a very, very complex exercise in interop between vendors, between protocols, between hardware. So it's very, very hard to get the digital twin concept to take off in such a way that we would be able to test those changes in a digital twin without impacting production. Now, there's been a few trends lately, I would say over the last 5 years, where they've kind of set the stage for being able to do this, in that we now have a bunch of containerized network operating systems, for example. So the cost in terms of resources, CPU and memory, to spin them up is much, much lower than it used to be. We have things like Kubernetes, which are very, very good at orchestrating a bunch of containers and potentially stitching them together in fairly relevant topologies when you start thinking about the network. So I think we finally have the pieces we need, and the old concept of pushing a change into production, hoping it doesn't break, if it does, reverting it, we're now getting to the point where we can actually do all of that CI piece inside the digital twin. You can imagine now with the rate of change we have that you could have thousands of changes in the form of new services being deployed, new attachments to those services. You could have thousands of those per day, potentially even per hour. So the only way to do this is to either, make the network just become invisible, so it's constantly moving in lockstep with the applications, or do it in such a way that it is properly integrated into that initial workflow of deploying the application, where you can define the networks that are going to be used and have all of those different kind of automation platforms react and deploy those services. So when we talk about consumability, as I said earlier, we're talking about a number of different aspects, but really it's just around making the network become almost invisible. I think if the network is invisible, we've succeeded in our goal.